Today I want to talk about the self-half-halt, aka crunches.
Eyes wide open, take it all in.
Everyone wants self-carriage in the horse, but it's always been made out as something that's going to take a really long, difficult process over not months, but years. We're gonna bypass all of that.
A rush to my head and it's technicolor. A rush to my head into the depths, let it take me under. A rush to my head.
I'm gonna talk about some of the keys and tips and tricks that I think can make this a lot easier for people. It's teaching the horse to half-halt himself.
And we are never coming down. I've been waiting for so long for a
So what's the movement goal for this activity? It's actually pretty simple. It's just two things. The first one is helping the horse find and quickly find and find over and over and over and over again a, quote, ready position, an athletic, agile posture that lets the horse be much more capable of moving in any direction when there is an unexpected stimulus. And it's exactly like the way we think of the ready position in human sports and athletics, where you're prepared, you don't know which way you're going to need to move, but you are prepared, you can react just like that. Now, this isn't necessarily going to change the way the horse is spending the majority of his time. This can help make some shifts in the horse's posture, but this is about helping the horse get into that position really quickly. Just like most human beings don't sit around or stand around or walk around in a ready position. So we don't expect the horses to either. But it's how fast can they get into that position? How stable can they be in the face of instability? The second goal is if the horse is going to be a riding horse, then this is absolutely crucial for helping the horse protect himself against the thing they did not evolve to do, which is to carry weight on their spine. So this helps the horse protect himself from the effects of a rider's weight and gravity pressing the spine into extension. So the first thing that we can see are these giant spikes sticking up. These are the spinous processes, and you can see how close together these are. And when you imagine where the rider might be sitting, where the rider's weight is, it's easy to see how kissing spines, when these spinous processes start to touch, is a real risk. What we want is to teach the horse to resist the pressure of the rider's weight and gravity pushing this spine into extension. And instead, this guy doesn't really move, but instead, we want to teach the horse to flex against the pressure of the rider. Basically, we don't want the horse to give to pressure. We want the horse to push against pressure. Now, the goal is not for the horse to have his back under a rider, up and rounded in this flexed position. But if the horse is able to do that flexion, then he can start to maintain a more evenly flexed spine instead of having what we'll call local kinks, where the space between two vertebrae is a different amount of extension or flexion compared to the space between the surrounding vertebrae, depending on whatever space would be there in a more neutral spine. Because the minute we get a local kink, which of course can also happen up here when people are pulling the horse's head in at the base of the neck, for example, Remember, what's in here is the spinal cord, which is the tail, the long tail of the brain. So the spinal cord has gray matter, white matter. We should think of this as the brain, but it happens to be down here instead of protected by the skull. So normally the brain has this big helmet of the skull, but this part of the brain is a lot more vulnerable. And now we do this. Now, and the spine, of course, is really strong, but again, the horses did not evolve for this, to carry something on their back. In fact, they evolved to actually throw things off of their back in case a predator lands on them. But the brain can sort of freak out when part of itself is not protected and is put under threat. So a local kink in the spine can be perceived by the brain as a shear force. So we can imagine the brain going, oh my God, this is really bad. And putting up all kinds of protection, danger signals, right? It's gonna send the horse pain, bracing, tension. It could be expressed as the horse just wanting to run, to maybe run its way out of this, or of course the opposite, very low energy, so that it doesn't, and it can appear as weakness, because the horse doesn't want to generate force that will be, force production that's going to have to travel through the spine. So it's going to do everything it can. We're looking at lifting the base of the neck. Well, the base of the neck, remember, are these, the bottom cervical vertebrae especially, which is way down here, right? Remember, the horse's neck is like this, what we see. So the base of the neck is not the withers, it's way down here. What we want is that slight weight shift back to help it be a little bit more loaded toward the hindquarters so that it can more agilely move in any direction. And we want to poof up through the withers, elevate the base of the cervical vertebrae, right? Some of you might think of it as lifting the thoracic sling. And it's pretty easy if we target this area right here. The horse is either lifting and poofing up here or pushing down, which is what we don't want. So that's it. Weight shift back, poofing up around the withers. Now I'm sort of trivializing what that takes to actually get started. But I think that in the years, one of the things that I've seen is that a lot of people try to do more with it than it actually needs. I will almost always say, you have more than enough weight shift back. It's just, are you ready to move in any direction? The poofing up behind the withers, up and around the withers, that depending on the horse, that can take a little bit more time than the weight shift back, but we'll talk about all that. This is just one example of a gazillion ways that someone could solve the sort of self-carriage, agility, flexing against the rider, all of that. So rather than waiting until the horse works his way up here to collection, we're going to train it from day one, because we believe that the horse wants to be agile and balanced right the now, no matter what stage that horse is at. This is what we start with. And it makes literally everything else much, much, much easier. This particular way of achieving it through this thing that we call crunches, by no means the only way to do this. But it is, for a lot of people and a lot of horses, a super convenient way. For most people and most horses, but not all, but an easy, convenient way is to back the horse up to a wall or a corner. But we only do this for like 1 or 2 sessions, just because it can help give the horse the idea of start to shift your weight back, but don't actually walk backwards. So as the horse starts to shift his weight back, and there's something there, a barrier there, well, now what's going to happen? The horse's back is going to go up automatically. Now, often it's not the area around the withers that's lifting. the part of the back that's lifting is the lower part of the back. And that's not actually what we want. But it's totally fine for a few sessions. Because again, we're just looking for subtle, and the horse is kind of trying to figure it out, and that's all we're trying to do, is just get the horse to kind of figure out the idea that this isn't a backup. But yet, it's a slight weight shift. So we sort of hint or suggest, but we don't use our backup cue. If you have a normal backup cue, you might want to use something that's very different because you don't want to mess up your backup cue, right? So there's a time when you want the horse to back up, and there's a time when you want the horse to shift his weight back, but not step back.
And we are never coming down. I've been waiting for so long for a heartbeat to call home. We had a moonlight at midnight.
Now, it's perfectly fine if the horse does step back while you're doing this, especially if you're not using a wall. It's fine, it's no big deal. They're finding their way to solve the problem. I will often put my hand behind the top of their tail, or even sort of hug their hindquarters.
Steady focus, breathe it all in. We have chosen, so let it begin. Got us feeling electric, it's all around. And we are never coming down.
But this helps the horse not think about backing up. But you want the horse to be lifting up around the withers. Now, often that's not what happens, especially if the horse pushes back hard with the front legs to shift his weight back. We want to introduce from the very, very beginning, maybe after 1 or 2 sessions. We want to make sure that we're introducing as much variation, variety, diversity, for my ecological dynamics movement science people, movement variability from the beginning. And I'm going to talk more about that because that's the biggest, I guess, problem that I see is too low variability. And the easiest solution to about 1,000 problems, and not just with this, is adding more variability. But there are some special ways that we can do it that make it even easier. Most problems come down to the horse overusing the head and neck. And why wouldn't they? Right? This is a huge, massive thing that they have that can make weight shift really easy, right? So the horses will either throw their head up and back, or they will, I can't do it with this guy, curl their head under. And we don't want either of those things. But not because there's something fundamentally wrong with the biomechanics of a horse lifting his head and neck up, right? It's a perfectly normal, authentic movement horses do all the time. Same thing with curling under, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's only an issue if the horse is repeating it over and over again and using it to solve a problem when we want the horse to explore other ways to solve the problem, especially with this, because what we're looking at is the horse to be able to use his whole body. And because we're looking at the horse lifting here rather than using his head and neck. And often if they're overusing their head and neck to do it, they're not lifting the base of the cervical spine. But if they're doing that, if they're shifting their weight back and they're lifting through the base of the cervical spine, right? You see them poofing up behind and around the withers. I don't really care where their head goes, as long as the head doesn't keep going to the same place. There are a couple of ways to solve this that are most of the time, again, not always, but most of the time, pretty easy. So the first one is just click earlier. Now he threw his head up a little bit on that one, which is not what I want, but he's probably thinking about going up. So instead, I'm going to just click earlier. That's one of the ways that I can help solve that, before he even gets started on lifting his head up. You click before the horse ever has a chance to throw his head and neck up. It's no big deal because we have a very easy fix. More. Good, yeah. So if I don't want him to throw his head up, I just have to give him a reason to look to the side. And he's already thinking about looking to the side. Normally I have a long target that makes it easier to ask him to look to the side, but I don't have it with me. Shape. But see, he's already looking to the side, which changes the affordance. We should all, I believe, be doing all of the time anyway, even if we're not trying to solve the overusing the neck. This works for the neck is going up, the neck is going down. Assuming you've taught the horse to look toward a target or your hand, you just add that. The horse just looks to the side. Because now you've taken the head and neck out of the equation, right? A horse can't lift his head way up and drop the base of the neck and look to the side. He can't be curling way under and also be looking to the side. So, we're just going to introduce a bend. But the crucial thing about this bend is that we're not ever going to tell the horse how to bend, how to do it. We don't care what the horse does to solve the problem of looking, except that we want to make sure that the horse is doing it with a lot of variability. So there's no incorrect way unless the horse is doing the same thing, no matter what it is, no matter how good it might be, over and over and over and over again. We just want as much variability, as much robustness as we can get, because, of course, that's the point. There's no benefit to the horse just standing in the pasture doing this, standing in the pasture, poofing up, right? The benefit is to be able to use this as a sort of platform, as a base for the horse to over and over reclaim that position, reclaim that stable, agile posture, so that he can use it in movements, so that we can use it in movements. And the only way that's going to work is, for my movement science peeps, is if it's transferred. And the only way it's going to transfer is if we train it with really high variability and start incorporating it into movement as soon as we possibly can. So even though by itself it starts as a standing exercise, there's no real point to that. The point is to start using it as soon as we can. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. How do we add all of this variability? Well, if you are familiar with more sort of traditional clicker training, where you're using successive approximation and you're trying to incrementally shape a very specific movement, we want to do the opposite. So that means, and yes, this can be very confusing to the horse. We want to be reinforcing that the horse is trying to solve this movement puzzle. We're not reinforcing a specific solution we're looking for. Yes, we want the horse to be poofing up, lifting the base of the cervical vertebrae, being able to lift their back, to flex it against the rider, pressing it into extension. So because of that, I'm going to reinforce trends in that direction. So I'm not going to be reinforcing when the horse is pushing the base of his neck up like this. Or if he's too tight here and the base of his neck is down, whatever it might be. I'm going to try not to reinforce that. But how do you introduce variability when you're looking for something pretty specific, which is elevating and poofing out around the withers? Well, it means that everything else about that movement should be robust as soon as possible, meaning lots of different aspects of doing it. So for example, we don't ever ask the horse to square up. And in fact, if I find the horse squaring up to get ready, I will often try to find clever ways to get them to shift in some way. So they're doing it asymmetrically, but in a different way each time, right? But asking for this look to the side, that can be a huge help. Because if the horse knows to sort of look to a target, we can go up here, we can go down there, we can vary our position, where we are, the footing we're on, now we're doing it on a mat, whatever it might be. Sideways on a slope, right? If you do this, the sort of crunches on unstable footing, sideways on a slope with a bend, that's one of the most powerful ways to change what's happening in the nervous system for the better, as long as you make sure the horse doesn't fall over, and that that you're not influencing with any restraint any part of the body. Now, when I say not influencing with restraint, you could have a halter on, you could even have a line on, you could even have a bridle and reins on, as long as you are not using those to suggest anything about how they do the movement, right? This is about telling the horse what to do, but not how to do it. That's got to be left up to his nervous system, and the goal is as many different ways as possible, but we're reinforcing trends, patterns toward this elevation. And some horses, this can take a while, and some horses, this can take a lot of experimenting. Some horses, by the third day, it's good enough. Some horses, it can be months and months. It's just another couple of tips. I mentioned combining this with movement at the earliest possible moment. So how do you do that? Easiest way, cue a crunch, step forward 3 steps. They can be totally normal steps. Just walk, walk, walk. Fine. Even if you're using the halter and going, come on, let's just take 3 steps. Stop, cue the crunch. Walk, walk, walk. Stop, cue the crunch. So if you're doing this, you're starting to get the horse to think about combining this with movement. And often, what will happen is if you do this enough, right, the horse may start to prepare himself, half-halt himself, before you've even cued it, in anticipation. So the more that you can start to mix this with movement with as much variability as you possibly can. Now, these transitions in and out of movement are also ways that you can drastically improve their movement capability. One of the ways that we can really help a horse potentially protect himself from all of the possible problems, including kissing spine, is to use this protocol, which is if I get on the horse, and the horse knows crunches. I've done it now on the ground. I've done it with weighted sandbags on his back, maybe the water bag, right? I know he can do the crunches. He can lift his back with weight, and then maybe a lighter rider, whatever it is. When you get on, if the horse can't or won't, which is the same thing as they can't, right? If they won't do something, it's because their brain is saying, not a good idea, don't do it. I'm not going to argue with their brain, right? It's not a behavior problem. It's the horse's nervous system is saying, not a good idea. So if the horse can't or won't do it when you get to a certain weight or a rider on his back, then we don't ride. We get off and we work our way back up again. And I mean no drive and restrain to do it. This has got to be self-half-halt, or else it's not a half-halt, it's not self-carriage. I'm not looking for the big, super rounded back. That might be what we do as an exercise with the crunch, right? Normally it can be much more subtle than that, but that's not what we're gonna actually ride. So when we say the horse needs to lift his back, what we really mean is the horse just needs to resist his back dropping. And that takes this lifting. And we're not talking about engaging which muscles, right? Remember, we're approaching this from the perspective of the nervous system, which means the entire body has to be involved in this. And we don't really know or care how the horse solves the problem as long as he does solve that problem. And all the things that people complain about, oh, the horse is just throwing his head up, oh, he's going under and dropping, well, then he's not doing it. So if the horse is able to lift through here and shift his weight back, then whatever he did to get there, as long as it's robust and they can do it in a whole wide range of ways, then we're good. I strongly recommend that if you're just starting to do this, you're just learning to do this, really go onto Instagram for now till I can convince more people to come to YouTube. Go onto Instagram, look at the hashtags for Panther Flow or Intrinsin inspired. And if you combine that with and look for crunch, you're gonna find a whole bunch of examples. And you're gonna find people who are very willing to help you, including me. So have fun.
Got us feeling electric, it's all around. And we are never coming down. I've been waiting for so long, for a heartbeat to call home. We are the moonlight and midnight blue. Into the silence we echo through. I've been waiting for so long, just to find you. Just to find you.
Oh my God, he's got his back feet on, yes.